The sliding glass doors of the gilded basket hissed open, releasing a cloud of chilled, lavender-scented air that felt like a slap against the humid afternoon heat. Elena Vance stepped onto the polished white marble, her heavy work boots leaving faint, dusty imprints with every step. She felt the immediate shift in the room's atmosphere, that sudden, suffocating silence that occurs when someone, undesirable, enters a space meant for the elite. Elena adjusted her tattered head wrap, her fingers grazing the coarse fabric of her paint-stained overalls. She knew how she looked, exhausted, grimy, and entirely out of place among the rows of artisanal honey and imported truffle oils. But her mind was elsewhere, locked on the crumpled list she held in her calloused hand. Behind the third register, Sarah Jenkins didn't just see a customer, she saw a problem. Sarah smoothed her crisp navy blue vest, adjusting her manager in training badge with a sense of self-importance that bordered on the divine. She watched Elena through narrowed eyes, her lip curling into a sneer that she didn't even bother to hide. To Sarah, the store was a sanctuary for the refined, and this woman was a stain on the aesthetic. She began tapping her manicured nails against the countertop, a rhythmic, impatient sound that signaled her growing hostility before a single word had been exchanged. The tension in the air thickened as Chloe, a local socialite draped in designer athleisure, pulled up behind Elena in the queue. Chloe didn't wait more than 3 seconds before let out a loud, theatrical sigh, pulling her phone from her yoga pants and checking her diamond-encrusted Rolex. She looked at Elena's back with a mixture of pity and disgust, leaning over to catch Sarah's eye in a silent, shared agreement that this was an outrage. Chloe's perfume, a cloying scent of expensive jasmine, fought for dominance against the faint smell of turpentine clinging to Elena's clothes. Elena reached the counter and carefully placed a single bottle of vintage champagne in a small, gold-foiled box of high-end chocolates on the black conveyor belt. She didn't look up, her voice a low, tired rasp as she murmured a polite hello. Sarah didn't respond. She stared at the bottle of Krug as if it were a stolen artifact, refusing to even reach out and scan it. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest and took a slow, deliberate step back from the register. "I'm going to need to see some identification and a physical proof of funds before we proceed with this transaction," Sarah said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that felt like venom. Elena finally looked up, her dark eyes reflecting a weary confusion. She asked why such a thing would be necessary for a bottle of wine. Sarah let out a sharp, jagged laugh that drew the attention of everyone in the front of the store. "Our store policy for certain high-risk profiles is very strict," Sarah barked, her volume increasing as she realized she had an audience. "We don't just hand over $300 bottles of champagne to people who clearly can't afford the bus fare home." Chloe chimed in from behind, her voice a shrill whine that cut through the store's soft background music. "Honestly, Sarah, can't you just call security? Some of us actually have places to be, and I don't feel comfortable standing this close to whatever this is." Chloe raised her phone, the camera lens pointed directly at Elena's face, a smug smirk playing on her lips. Elena felt the heat rising in her chest, a familiar fire she had spent years trying to extinguish. She tried to explain that she had the money, that she was just stopping by after a long day of work, but Sarah wasn't listening. The cashier reached for the store's PA system, her eyes locked on Elena's with a terrifying sense of triumph. "Security to the front registers immediately," Sarah shouted into the microphone, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "We have a homeless woman attempting to shoplift luxury goods and scamming the system." The "no tolerance" alarm began to blare, a high-pitched, rhythmic screech that felt like it was drilling into Elena's skull. Shoppers stopped in their tracks, staring and whispering as the shame of the moment washed over her. Elena stood perfectly still, her jaw set so tight it ached. She didn't yell, she didn't run, and she didn't plead. She simply watched Sarah, who was now laughing with Chloe over the audacity of the situation. In that moment, surrounded by the cold marble and the judging eyes of the Westchester elite, Elena realized the storm hadn't just begun, it was already here, and she was the only one who knew how much damage it was about to do. The fluorescent hum of the grocery store faded into the rhythmic, metallic clatter of a late-night subway train rattling through a dark tunnel 20 years earlier. A younger Elena Vance sat huddled on a cracked plastic seat, the blue-tinged light of the car flickering over her tired face. Her hands, much smoother then but already beginning to callous, were stained with the gray ink of a law textbook. She wasn't just tired, she was a kind of exhausted that lived deep in the marrow of her bones. While her peers were at happy hours or sleeping, Elena was traveling between her third shift as a night office cleaner and her morning lectures. She lived in a world of strictly counted nickels and the persistent, gnawing smell of industrial bleach that never seemed to leave her skin. Every floor she mopped and every toilet she scrubbed was a payment toward a future she was building for herself and her younger brother, Marcus. She remembered the nights Marcus would fall asleep on a pile of coats in the corner of a law library because they couldn't afford childcare, his small chest rising and falling as she memorized the complexities of property law by the light of a single desk lamp. The memory shifted, turning colder and more clinical. Elena stood in a glass-walled conference room, her graduation gown still fresh in her mind, only to be met with the wall of culture fit. She had graduated at the top of her class, but the senior partners at the prestigious firms didn't see her GPA, they saw her neighborhood. They looked at her resume and then at her hair, her skin, and the way she didn't quite possess the polished Ivy League cadence they expected. She was told she was too aggressive, or not the right fit for our client base. The rejection stung, but it didn't break her. It ignited a different kind of ambition. If they wouldn't give her a seat at the table, she would simply buy the building that housed the table. She pivoted into real estate, starting with small, dilapidated lots and turning them into gold, driven by a quiet, burning vow to never let anyone make her feel invisible again. Far across town, in a very different kind of home, a young Sarah Jenkins sat at a kitchen table, listening to the bitter poison of her father's voice. He had just been laid off from a middle management position he'd held for a decade, and his ego was hemorrhaging. He slammed a beer bottle onto the counter and told Sarah that hard work didn't matter anymore because people like them, people who didn't look like them, were taking everything through handouts and diversity quotas. Sarah watched his face redden with a misplaced rage, absorbing the lie that her lack of success would always be someone else's fault. She learned to look at the world as a zero-sum game where she had to guard her status with a sharpened tongue, lest it be stolen by someone she deemed inferior. The vision of the past snapped back to the present reality of the gilded basket. Elena looked at the young woman screaming at her from behind the register and felt a strange, hollow sense of recognition. She looked past the anger in Sarah's eyes and saw the ghost of that bitter father. Elena knew exactly who Sarah was. She remembered the name Jenkins from a corporate restructuring file years ago. She had actually been the one to sign off on Sarah's father's severance package, insisting it be doubled because she felt for his family. The irony was a heavy weight in the air, thick and suffocating. Next to them, Leo, the elderly janitor, paused his rhythmic sweeping. He leaned against his broom, his eyes widening as he looked at Elena. He had seen her on the cover of Crane's Business Weekly just last month, the Queen of Westchester Real Estate. He knew exactly who was standing in those paint-stained overalls. He caught Elena's eye for a fraction of a second, his expression a mix of shock and silent understanding. He didn't say a word, recognizing the tactical stillness in Elena's posture. He knew she wasn't a victim, she was a predator waiting for the right moment. Elena gave him a microscopic nod, a silent command to stay back. The hidden truth of her identity hummed beneath the surface of the confrontation, a silent power that made the insults Sarah hurled feel like pebbles being thrown at a mountain. Elena stood tall, the ghosts of her struggle reinforcing her spine, as she prepared to let the injustice reach its inevitable, explosive peak. The tension inside the gilded basket snapped like a frayed wire. Sarah didn't just stop at the verbal assault, she leaned over the counter, her face reddening as she snatched Elena's black titanium credit card. She didn't even try to swipe it. Instead, she held it up for the growing crowd to see, her voice dripping with a mocking, high-pitched theatricality. "Nice try with the prop, sweetie," Sarah sneered, her fingers trembling with a mix of adrenaline and malice. She tried to bend the card, hoping to snap it in half to prove it was a cheap plastic fake, but the metal held firm. Frustrated by the small failure, she hissed a breath through her teeth and flicked her wrist, tossing the card into the grimy wastebasket behind the counter. Oops. Looks like your fake ID belongs with the rest of the trash. Elena didn't move. She didn't reach over the counter or scream. She simply watched her property land among the discarded receipts and coffee grounds. The isolation was immediate and chilling. The other shoppers, people Elena might have sat next to at a charity gala just a week prior, began to close ranks behind Sarah. They didn't see a successful developer, they saw a disruption to their Saturday afternoon. One man in a golf shirt grumbled about these people, looking for a handout, while Chloe, still recording with a predatory gleam in her eye, moved closer. Just leave, honey, Chloe whispered, her voice loud enough for the phone's microphone to catch. You're embarrassing yourself. Go back to whatever bridge you crawled out from under and let the grown-ups shop in peace. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors hissed open again, and Marcus Vance stepped into the store. Dressed in a sharp, charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, his presence usually commanded the room. He took one look at his sister in her paint-stained overalls and the hysterical cashier screaming at her, and his jaw tightened. He moved instinctively toward the counter, his hand reaching into his jacket for his bar association ID, but Elena caught his eye. It was a sharp, silent command, a look that told him to stand down. She needed this to go all the way. She needed the world to see exactly what happened when people thought no one was watching. Marcus stopped in his tracks, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched his sister endure the unendurable. Sarah, sensing she was losing the spotlight, decided to escalate. Her eyes darted to a display of organic, free-range eggs sitting on the edge of the counter. With a swift, practiced motion that looked like an accident to the casual observer, she swept her hand across the display. A dozen cartons hit the floor, the shells shattering against Elena's boots, splashing yellow yolk and white goo across the industrial fabric of her overalls. Oh my God, she's attacking me, she's destroying the store, Sarah shrieked, throwing her hands up to her face as if she were the victim of a physical assault. Someone call the cops. She's violent, she's out of control. The store erupted. Chloe was narrating the attack to her live stream, her voice rising in a fever pitch of fake concern. You guys, she's literally destroying the place. We're in so much danger right now. Elena stood in the center of the mess, the cold slime of the eggs soaking into her socks, completely isolated in a sea of pointing fingers and digital screens. Even the two-faced assistant manager, who had been watching from the office and knew Elena was a regular, ducked his head and closed the blinds, refusing to stand up for the truth. But in the shadows by the loading dock, Leo the janitor had seen enough. He didn't have a suit or a law degree, but he had the keys to the security booth. He moved with a quiet, invisible grace, slipping into the small room where the monitors glowed. His hand reached for a toggle switch that was almost never used, the internal audio override. He clicked it on, ensuring that every word, every slur, and every lie being spewed at the register was being burned onto the hard drive in high-fidelity sound. Sarah leaned over the counter one last time, her face inches from Elena's. The mask of the professional worker was gone, replaced by a raw, ugly sneer. I know your type, Sarah whispered, the words coming out in a hot, foul breath. You think because you found a fancy card in the gutter that you can walk in here and act like you're one of us? You're nothing but a gutter rat, and you don't belong in this zip code. You never will. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't blink. A slow, cold smile began to spread across her face. A smile that should have warned Sarah that she was standing on the edge of a cliff. You're right about one thing, Sarah, Elena said, her voice terrifyingly calm amidst the chaos. This zip code is about to change forever. I hope you enjoyed your last hour of employment. The distant, rhythmic wail of police sirens began to cut through the store's frantic atmosphere, and Sarah smirked, thinking the cavalry had arrived to finish her dirty work. She had no idea she had just invited the executioner into the room. The blue and red lights of the patrol cars strobed against the high-gloss windows of the Gilded Basket, turning the luxury grocery store into a frantic, pulsing crime scene. When the officers burst through the doors, Sarah Jenkins transformed instantly, her aggressive sneer melting into a mask of trembling, tearful vulnerability. She pointed a shaking finger at Elena, who stood perfectly still amidst the puddle of broken eggs and shattered dignity. Sarah's voice went up an octave, cracking with calculated desperation as she told the officers that Elena had threatened her, destroyed store property, and tried to use a stolen high-limit credit card. The officers, seeing Elena's paint-splattered overalls and the chaotic scene, didn't ask questions. They saw a vagrant and a distraught worker. Within seconds, the cold, heavy bite of steel ratcheted around Elena's wrists. The store erupted in a chorus of hushed approval. Chloe leaned in with her phone, capturing the moment the dangerous woman was led away, her voice a purr of satisfaction as she told her followers that justice was finally being served. As the officers marched Elena toward the exit, she didn't struggle. She didn't scream her innocence or beg for mercy. She kept her head high, her eyes locking onto Sarah's for one final, chilling second. Sarah was smirking, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph that said she had successfully erased a nuisance from her perfect world. Elena was bundled into the back of the cruiser, the door slamming shut with a heavy, final thud that signaled her total defeat to the outside world. But inside the dim, sterile walls of the holding cell at the local precinct, the atmosphere was entirely different. Elena sat on the hard bench, her hands finally free of the cuffs but still stained with dried egg yolk. The door opened, and Marcus walked in, his charcoal suit still sharp, though his expression was a storm of barely contained rage. He dropped a thick legal folder onto the metal table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He told her the video of her arrest was already at 3 million views and that the internet was calling for her head. He begged her to let him post bail, to release the store's internal footage immediately and crush them. But Elena just looked at the folder, her voice coming out in a low, steady hum that made Marcus stop mid-sentence. Elena opened the folder to reveal a series of acquisition documents. She pointed to a specific paragraph, the morality and ethics clause in the master lease for the entire shopping complex. She explained to Marcus that if she fought this as a simple case of a mistaken arrest, she would win a settlement, but the culture of the store would never change. However, if she allowed herself to be banned for life and processed as a criminal, the breach of contract would be absolute. She wasn't a victim anymore, she was a strategist. She told Marcus to leave the bail money in his pocket. She wanted the official trespass notice, signed by the store's owner. She wanted the paper trail to be undeniable. The shift in her eyes was terrifying. The weary woman in the overalls was gone, replaced by the CEO who had dismantled billion-dollar conglomerates before breakfast. She told Marcus that she was playing the long game now. She wasn't going to react with anger, she was going to respond with ownership. While Sarah was likely at home celebrating her bravery with a glass of wine, Elena spent the night in that cell with a golf pencil and the back of a legal pad, redrawing the map of the neighborhood. She realized that the CEO of the grocery chain, a man who had been dodging her calls for weeks regarding a merger, was about to find out that his future boss was currently sitting in a jail cell because of the monster he had promoted to manager. As the sun began to peek through the high, barred window of the cell, Elena leaned back and smiled. The defeat was a lie, and the trap was officially set. The heavy iron door of the precinct groaned open the following morning, and Elena Vance stepped out into the crisp dawn air. She was still wearing the paint-stained overalls, but the way she carried herself had shifted entirely. She wasn't the tired laborer anymore, she was a ghost in the machinery of the city, moving with a terrifying, quiet purpose. Marcus was waiting by the curb in a sleek black SUV, and as she climbed in, he handed her a fresh tablet and a hot coffee. The video of her arrest was still trending, a digital wildfire of misinformation, but Elena didn't even look at it. She was busy reviewing the debt structures of the grocery chain's parent company. Her eyes scanned the spreadsheets with the precision of a surgeon, identifying every weak point, every outstanding loan, and every leveraged asset. Back at the Gilded Basket, Sarah Jenkins was having the best day of her life. She moved through the aisles with a new, aggressive swagger, her chin held high as if she had personally saved the neighborhood from a barbarian invasion. The store owner, a man more concerned with bottom lines than human dignity, had promoted her to acting manager on the spot. He loved the bravery she'd shown in the viral video, and the store was seeing a surge in supportive customers who wanted to shake the hand of the girl who stood her ground. Sarah spent the afternoon bragging to the staff, snapping her fingers at the baggers, and enjoying the feeling of absolute power. She even had a framed copy of the Band for Life notice she'd issued to Elena displayed behind the service desk like a trophy. She was so blinded by her own hubris that she didn't notice the black town cars idling in the parking lot or the men in tailored suits taking photographs of the building's structural supports. While Sarah celebrated, Elena was operating in power mode from a high-rise office in Manhattan. The paint-stained overalls were gone, replaced by a bespoke navy suit that felt like armor. She sat at the head of a mahogany table, surrounded by a team of high-priced investigators and forensic accountants. They had spent the last 48 hours digging into Sarah's past and the store's history. Marcus presented a stack of signed affidavits from former employees, people of color who had been fired for minor infractions under Sarah's watch, others who had been followed through the aisles just like Elena. The evidence was a mountain of systemic rot. Elena listened in silence, her fingers steepled, her mind already 3 moves ahead. The trap was being set with microscopic detail. Elena didn't just want Sarah fired, she wanted to dismantle the entire foundation that allowed people like Sarah to thrive. She authorized the anonymous buyout of the remaining 20% of the grocery chain's distressed debt, effectively becoming their primary creditor overnight. Then, she made a phone call to a contact in the city's zoning department. Within hours, a large, neon orange, construction and foreclosure sign appeared on the vacant lot directly adjacent to the store. Sarah saw it through the window and laughed, telling Chloe over the phone that it was probably just a new park for the right kind of people. She had no idea the sign was a ticking time bomb, a physical manifestation of the ground vanishing beneath her feet. In the quiet hours of the evening, Elena met Leo the janitor in a dimly lit diner far from the suburban bubble of Westchester. She pushed a heavy envelope across the table toward him. Leo tried to protest, but Elena stopped him with a firm, grateful hand on his arm. She wasn't just giving him a reward, she was offering him a new life. She told him that when the dust settled, she would need a head of security for her regional district, someone with eyes that saw the things others chose to ignore. Leo looked at the documents, his hands trembling as he realized he would never have to mop another floor for a woman who didn't know his last name. As the week drew to a close, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Elena instructed her assistant to schedule a mandatory shareholders and staff gala at the Gilded Basket. She insisted the event be held at that specific location to celebrate the upcoming merger, and she made it a point to request that the heroic acting manager, Sarah Jenkins, be the face of the store for the evening. The invitation was sent with a formal gold seal, and when Sarah received it, she shrieked with delight, imagining herself rubbing elbows with the billionaire elite. She spent her entire paycheck on a designer dress, never realizing she was buying a costume for her own public execution. Elena stood in her office, looking out over the skyline as the sun set, her reflection in the glass cold and immovable. The grind was over. The preparation was complete. All that was left was the gathering. The Gilded Basket had been scrubbed and polished until it shimmered like a diamond under the gala's specialized lighting. The scent of lavender had been replaced by the expensive, heady aroma of imported lilies and the crisp, effervescent sting of vintage champagne. A long red carpet rolled out from the curb, flanked by velvet ropes that kept a small crowd of curious onlookers at bay. Inside, the usual grocery aisles had been cleared to make room for linen-draped tables and a mahogany stage. It was a transformation of absolute opulence, designed to celebrate the massive corporate merger that would redefine the regional market. Sarah Jenkins was in her absolute element. She moved through the room in a tight-fitting, emerald green silk dress that cost 3 months of her former salary, her heels clicking with a sharp, arrogant rhythm on the marble floors. As the acting manager, she acted as the unofficial hostess, fluttering around the board members and wealthy investors with a practiced, sycophantic smile. She clutched a glass of sparkling cider, strictly professional, as she told everyone, and leaned in close to Chloe, who was radiant in a shimmering silver cocktail dress. Chloe was busy scanning the room for celebrities, her phone already out and recording. "I'm telling you, Sarah," Chloe whispered, her eyes darting around the room, "this is your moment. Everyone who is anyone is here. You're basically the face of the company now after that video went viral. The CEO himself told me your decisive action is exactly what this brand stands for." Sarah beamed, her chest swelling with a pride so thick it was almost suffocating. She truly believed she was the hero of the story, the brave protector who had kept the trash from contaminating this sanctuary of wealth. The atmosphere shifted when the CEO of the grocery chain, a man named Mr. Sterling who looked perpetually nervous in his tight tuxedo, tapped the microphone on the stage. He announced that the guest of honor, the woman behind the multi-billion-dollar acquisition, had arrived. The room went silent. The heavy glass doors hissed open, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. A sleek, midnight black Maybach pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the camera flashes. When the door opened, a woman stepped out, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop spinning. She wore a bespoke, ivory-white power suit that radiated authority, her hair styled in a sophisticated, sharp bob. Her presence was magnetic, a force of nature that commanded immediate silence. Sarah, standing near the front of the stage, felt her heart drop into her stomach. She squinted, her brain refusing to process the image before her. The facial structure, the stride, the piercing dark eyes, it was impossible. It was the woman from the registers. But it couldn't be. This woman was draped in millions of dollars of jewelry and carried herself like she owned the very air people breathed. As Elena Vance walked into the store, Sarah's shock curdled into a frantic, hysterical rage. She didn't see a billionaire, she saw a trespasser who had somehow stolen a suit and a car to pull off the ultimate prank. Sarah surged forward, pushing past a startled waiter, her emerald dress rustling loudly. "Security!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking the elegant silence of the room like a hammer on glass. "Security! Get this woman out of here right now. How did she even get past the gate? This is a private, high-profile event." The board members froze. Mr. Sterling's face went a sickly shade of gray. But Sarah was too far gone in her own delusion to notice. She marched right up to Elena, her finger trembling as she pointed it inches from Elena's nose. She smelled the jasmine perfume on Chloe, who had followed her like a loyal dog, phone raised to capture the shameful moment. "I don't know who you think you're fooling with this little dress-up act," Sarah hissed, her eyes wide and manic. "But you were banned for life. I personally signed the papers. You're a shoplifter, a vagrant, and a liar. You don't belong here, and you never will. Get out before I have the police haul you back to that cell you just crawled out of." Sarah turned to Mr. Sterling, her voice rising in a plea for validation. "Sir, this is her. This is the woman from the video. I told you I'd handle the security risks. I'm the reason our brand is famous. I'm the one protecting your investment." The room was so quiet you could hear the bubbles popping in the champagne flutes. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She stood there, a mountain of calm in the center of Sarah's frantic storm. Then, a man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo stepped out from behind Elena. It was Leo, but he wasn't carrying a broom. He looked like a statesman, his posture straight and his eyes cold. "Actually, Sarah," Leo said, his voice carrying through the room with a deep, resonant authority that silenced her mid-breath. "You're the reason this brand is about to cease to exist." Elena slowly reached out and took the microphone from the podium, her eyes never leaving Sarah's. The look on her face wasn't anger, it was something much more terrifying. It was the look of a person who had finally decided to finish a task she had started a long time ago. The silence in the room was no longer polite, it was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Elena Vance stood on the stage, the light from the chandeliers catching the sharp edges of her ivory suit, making her look like a monument carved from marble. She didn't rush to speak. She let the weight of her presence sink into Sarah's bones. Sarah, still standing at the foot of the stage in her emerald dress, looked up with a face that was rapidly losing its color. The smug triumph that had fueled her for the last hour was evaporating, replaced by a cold, prickling dread that started at her toes and climbed to her throat. Elena leaned into the microphone, her voice a low, melodic thrum that vibrated through the speakers. "I'd like to thank you all for coming," Elena began, her eyes locked onto Sarah's. "And I'd especially like to thank Sarah Jenkins. Without her diligent security measures, I might never have realized exactly what kind of culture we were subsidizing here." A massive screen behind the podium, which had been displaying the corporate logo, suddenly flickered and changed. It didn't show the viral video Chloe had edited. It showed the raw, high-definition feed from the store's internal security system, enhanced by the crystal-clear audio Leo had captured. The room watched in horrified silence as Sarah's face appeared on the 20-foot screen, her mouth twisted in a sneer. The audio was unmistakable. The whispered slurs, the calculated sound of Sarah's hand sweeping the egg cartons onto the floor, and the cold, vibrating hate in her voice as she told Elena she didn't belong in this zip code. Every guest in the room, from the board of directors to the local press, saw the truth. They saw a woman not in fear, but in the throes of a power trip, weaponizing her position to humiliate a customer she thought was beneath her. Sarah's knees buckled. She reached out to grab the edge of a linen-draped table to steady herself, nearly knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. That's not how it happened," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "That video is faked. It's AI." She looked at Chloe for support, but Chloe had already lowered her phone, her face a mask of panicked neutrality. Chloe was already stepping backward, trying to disappear into the shadows of the crowd. Elena stepped down from the podium, walking slowly to the edge of the stage until she was looking directly down at Sarah. "You were right about one thing, Sarah," Elena said, her voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority. "I was banned for life. But you forgot to check who actually holds the deed to the ground you're standing on. My name is Elena Vance. I am the chairwoman of Vance Global Holdings. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, I am the majority shareholder of this grocery chain. And as the owner of this land, I have just invoked the morality clause in your franchise agreement." Marcus stepped forward from the wings, his charcoal suit looking even sharper under the gala lights. He handed a thick stack of legal documents to the store's CEO, Mr. Sterling, who took them with trembling hands. "These documents," Marcus announced to the room, "serve as formal notice of the immediate termination of this store's lease and a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against Sarah Jenkins and Chloe Vanderbilt." The color drained completely from Sarah's face, leaving her looking like a ghost in an expensive dress. She sank to her knees right there on the polished marble, her silk skirt pooling around her in the yellow yolk-colored light of the projector. "I'm sorry, I didn't know," she wailed, her hands shaking as she reached out toward Elena's boots. "I was just doing my job. I was stressed. Please, I have a life here." Elena didn't move, she didn't look away. She looked down at Sarah with a calm, analytical pity. "You didn't know because you chose not to see," Elena replied. "You saw a head wrap in paint-stained overalls, and you decided I was worth less than the air I was breathing. You didn't just fail a stress test, Sarah. You revealed the rot at the heart of this establishment." The killing blow was not a shout or a strike. It was Elena reaching into her pocket and pulling out the black titanium cards Sarah had thrown in the trash days earlier. She held it out, letting the light glint off the metal. "This card was meant to pay for a gift for my brother," she said. "But since you threw it in the trash, I decided to use the funds to buy the whole building instead." Elena dropped the card. It didn't land in the trash this time. It landed right in front of Sarah's knees with a sharp, metallic clack that signaled the end of everything Sarah had worked for. "Security," Elena said, looking toward Leo. "Please escort these trespassers off my property. They've been banned for life." The sirens that had once heralded Elena's humiliation now served as the background music for Sarah's departure. The emerald green silk dress, once a symbol of her soaring ambition, was now stained with dirt and tears as she was led out of the store she thought she owned. Chloe followed closely behind, her head shielded by a designer handbag, trying to avoid the camera flashes of the very same press she had invited to witness her bravery. The Gilded Basket closed its doors that night, but they didn't stay closed for long. Within weeks, The clinical lavender scent and the overpriced truffles were replaced by the smell of fresh baked sourdough and the vibrant, earthy aroma of locally grown produce. Elena had transformed the boutique into the Vance Community Hub, a nonprofit market dedicated to bringing fresh food and vocational training to the very people Sarah had spent her life trying to exclude. 5 years passed with the steady, quiet rhythm of true progress. Elena Vance stood on the sidewalk across from the hub, once again wearing her favorite pair of paint-stained overalls. She was finishing a mural on the side of the building, a vibrant, sprawling depiction of a diverse community rising from the ashes of a storm. Her hands were calloused and gray with charcoal, but her heart had never felt lighter. She watched as Marcus, now a judge known for his unwavering fairness, walked into the center to mentor a group of young law students. She saw Leo, dressed in a sharp blazer as the director of security and operations, greeting every customer by name, his presence a constant reminder that dignity is not a status, but a choice. Elena stepped back to admire her work, her boots clicking softly on the pavement. A few yards away, a woman in a tattered, faded uniform was down on her knees, scrubbing the sidewalk with a bucket of gray, soapy water. The woman's movements were slow and heavy, her shoulders hunched under the weight of a long day's labor. When she looked up, the sunlight hit her face, revealing the hollowed eyes and bitter lines of Sarah Jenkins. She looked at Elena, and for a long moment, time seemed to fold back on itself. Sarah didn't yell. She didn't point a finger or talk about zip codes. She simply looked at the woman she had once tried to destroy, the shame of that night still burning in her eyes like a low-grade fever. Elena didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She walked to a nearby stand, purchased a cold bottle of water, and set it down on the concrete next to Sarah's bucket. It was a gesture of mercy, but also a final, quiet lesson. Sarah watched her walk away, realizing that the band for life notice she had once handed out was a prison she had built for herself. Elena Vance had moved on to build a legacy, while Sarah was still stuck trying to scrub away the stains of her own character. The moral of the story is one that the world often forgets in its rush toward status and power. We are all just one choice away from the dirt or the throne. Never judge a person by the clothes they wear or the work they do, because the person you look down on today might be the one holding the keys to your future tomorrow. Kindness costs nothing, but the price of arrogance is a debt that karma always collects in full. Elena looked back at the hub one last time, a smile touching her lips, knowing that true wealth isn't found in a titanium card, but in the ability to turn a place of exclusion into a home for everyone.